couple of months back, I released a video talking about the Jehovah's Witnesses and education. In that work, I addressed the question of whether they are anti-education and what they've said regarding university. The conclusion I reached was not so much that they are against education per se, but that their views toward it are still far from praiseworthy. When you scratch into their policies regarding university or advanced education, you may notice a rather more familiar attitude surface. We've seen it before crop up in communities down through the ages. In that video, I identified this attitude as anti-intellectualism. Now, what does that mean, though? Does it mean the Jehovah's Witnesses as a group are unintelligent? No, not at all. I've actually commented on that with fairly high detail in a work entitled Jehovah's Witnesses and Intelligence. Both videos mentioned so far will be linked below in the description. Contrasted with the stance of anti-education, anti-intellectualism is a far more accurate way of characterizing the witness position. But what is anti-intellectualism? What are some of its features? Why is it dangerous? Perhaps not all of us are quite so fortunate at this time to pursue higher education. Having said that, what can one do to ensure they are being well informed or treating reason with the respect it deserves? Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, thanks as usual for stopping in. I'm glad I can finally get around to this subject. The governing body's policies toward advanced education are perhaps not quite as damaging as those topics which tend to pull the most focus when speaking about the witnesses. But it is something that most leavers deeply resent about their history with the group. A lot of folks out there feel profoundly robbed of their potential. Well, what is anti-intellectualism? I've crudely defined it in other videos. Here's what it is in a nutshell. But the claim is always the same, you see. Don't rely on your faculty of reason. Your intellect will lead you astray. Now, if you believe in the Bible, I totally respect that, and I have no interest in undermining your trust in it. But very often, people will resort to the following scriptures in pulling this subtle trick. They'll invoke Proverbs 3 verse 5, "Trust in thy Lord with all your heart, and lean not upon your own understanding." Colossians 2 verse 8, "Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit." 1 Corinthians 1:27, "God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise." 2 Timothy 3 verse 7, "Ever learning and ever able to come to the knowledge of the truth." Ecclesiastes 12 verse 12, "Be careful, my child, of anything beyond them. There's no end to the excessive production of scrolls. Studying too much wearies the flesh." This use, or some would call it a misuse of Scripture, is what's called anti-intellectualism. So as you can see, this is more of a fashion or distaste for elitism, and it can stem from several disparities within society, which the sentiment itself is not altogether unjustified. Most notably, anti-intellectualism can emerge from an acute economic distance between classes. Academics and intellectuals are generally the upper crust of society. They come from families and circumstance who are not so distracted by providing for basic hand-to-mouth necessities. So this can allow individuals to contemplate issues at a very high level of abstraction. And in so doing, it becomes less and less relevant to the struggle of the common man. Again, I'm not making the connection between economic status and intelligence. I'm drawing a relationship between economic status and academic attainment. What use has the window washer for problems like trisecting an angle with a straight edge and compass? What need does the janitor have for skeptical paradoxes, such as Descartes' bad case scenario? And what obliges the average JW to grasp the full import of Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorems when the Great Tribulation is just around the corner? From a certain perspective, that's just completely impractical, like painting the deck of the Titanic. And this class distinction is even evident when it comes to the forms of recreation they participate in. The upper crust of society has more time and money to enjoy highbrow things, fine wine, the ballet, art galleries, historical or architectural tourism. The life of the decadent and the humble both have their subjective advantages. But you see, what emerges from that is a kind of style or chic, where depending on your roots, you are evaluated by the restaurants you frequent, the clothes you wear, the friends you keep, the schools you attended, and even the music you listen to. And so anti-intellectualism is all tied into that, where you can be judged merely based on the opinions you hold. Academics spurn the average Jehovah's Witness, who is just lucky enough to get a trade or become a pharmaceutical technician, while that same witness in turn scoffs a professor for being a so-called free thinker, savvy about world matters, or a sophist who, like those scriptures mentioned earlier, has somehow been corrupted with man-made philosophy or diffuse logic. I'm reminded of that humorous rebuke of Festus to Paul in Acts 26 verse 24 when he exclaimed, "Paul, thou art beside thyself. Much learning doth make thee mad." You have to excuse me. Whenever I read that scripture, it's got to be in Old English. I don't know why. Ironic to the governing body's position on advanced education, the Apostle Paul was famed for his staggering academic attainment. The Christian religion in no small measure rests its trustworthiness on Paul's credible testimony and background. That's just an aside. Here's how Wikipedia defines anti-intellectualism. Anti-intellectualism is hostility to and mistrust of intellect, intellectuals, and intellectualism, commonly expressed as deprecation of education and philosophy and the dismissal of art, literature, and science as impractical, politically motivated, and even contemptible human pursuits. Anti-intellectuals present themselves and are perceived as champions of common folk, populists against political and academic elitism, and tend to see educated people as a status class that dominates political discourse and higher education while being detached from the concerns of ordinary people. End quote. This dynamic has been at the center of the political fray surrounding Brexit, the Trump phenomenon, Marine Le Pen's anti-EU strides back in 2017, the Yellow Vest movement, continued strength and support for the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, and even Wexit here in Canada. And it's certainly nothing new either. Anti-intellectualism dates back to ancient Greece, with the contempt for moral relativism among the sophists. Wikipedia says, in the second half of the 5th century BC, particularly in Athens, sophist came to denote a class of mostly itinerant intellectuals who taught courses in various subjects, speculated about the nature of language and culture, and employed rhetoric to achieve their purposes, generally to persuade or convince others. Sophists all had one important thing in common. Whatever else they did or did not claim to know, they characteristically had a great understanding of what words would entertain, or impress, or persuade an audience. This is from where we derive that word sophistry, as being a subtle, tricky, superficially plausible, but generally fallacious method of reasoning. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses, especially when it comes to the university's position on evolution, for example, which is incredibly diverse and not necessarily atheistic, they accuse the university of this dishonest form of tricky reasoning. But the governing body fundamentally misunderstands that the university doesn't teach one orthodox doctrine of evolution. While natural selection is more or less accepted as a fact, there's a profound amount of intellectual diversity in academia. There are many high-profile scholars who criticize the view that evolution is a theory of everything, or explains conscious life, or that it somehow discredits religious belief. So instead of the governing body offering a credible objection to what's taught therein, or arguing in good faith, they do what anti-intellectuals do, writing off the whole academic institution. And it's a very unfortunate thing because it condemns many in their ranks to wage slavery, fundamentalism, and squandering of precious potential. So that addresses some of the features and dangers of anti-intellectualism. I think other dangers simply include closed-mindedness, a lack of skill in logical analysis, inner conflict, and isolation. Which brings me to my last point about how to ensure you're being well informed. How can you rise above these fashions? How can you be certain your views are not being framed by the sophisticate scorn of the practical and humble life, or vice versa, the lowbrow derision of the elite, anti-intellectualism? Well, there's really only one way. I've talked about this in several works now, such as in What is Truth, Confirmation Bias, and the Jehovah's Witnesses Debunked. I have to just be clear on my debunking video. I was attacking the governing body's claim to exclusive divine authority. I wasn't debunking the entire religion. Likewise in this one, I'm not saying JWs are wrong because they are anti-intellectuals. I'm simply pointing out an attitude salient in their literature. But what I really focused on in those videos was the absolute paramountcy of reason. I've shown how anti-intellectuals and sophists all the same can both be guilty of indirectly attacking reason. There's a lot to say on this matter, so you should really follow me over to those works. I'll create a playlist with those 3 videos mentioned and have it linked below in the description and in the end screen. When you hear arguments for any position whatever, you need to start with asking, what is being stated about our faculty of reason? If someone implies in any way that thinking is the problem, they are aggressing reason. Now, of course, this sounds obvious, doesn't it? But I've provided many examples for this because it comes in subtle forms. When someone rejects a proposition because there may be an underlying motivation for a given belief, or because the assertion is too complicated, or because of some evolutionary or psychological barrier one has, or because of any other reason besides the deficiency of that idea itself, these are all volleys upon the act of sense-making. Just to be clear, this doesn't necessarily mean that a proposition may be entirely or absolutely false. That's why I'd never say the Jehovah's Witnesses are completely wrong. Like most matters, it is possible for a belief to be true in one sense or from a particular vantage point, but then to be simultaneously false from another. The great task of being a well-informed person comes down to not allowing yourself to get locked in, so to speak. Entertain all ideas, try to find merit in them, but always be mindful of the trajectory or context within which a truth is being asserted. And you'll discover that most worldviews fit together quite harmoniously like an ornate tapestry or mosaic. Many ideas seem utterly incompatible, don't they? For example, it's impossible for the Jehovah's Witnesses to have the one and only ultimate truth, and simultaneously the Catholics to have it. But as I said, when you strip these views down to the trajectory it's being asserted from, or the fundamental value that belief is structured upon, we all have some relationship with truth and reality, and the great engine of that is reason. And that is something everyone can do. It doesn't require an expensive education from a prestigious institution, especially with access to the internet. Ignorance in our day and age really is a choice. So those are my thoughts on the topic of anti-intellectualism. Tell me what you think of all that below in the comments. Do you think that's an accurate portrayal of the governing body's position toward advanced education or elitism? Let me know. This is Derek London. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, did you like this video? You know what to do. And if something I mentioned today resonated with you, click one of them cards on this screen. I have lots of related content sure to interest you. Thanks as always for your views, and we'll see you next time.